God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations in all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. Amen. So it's 20 minutes before the wedding, and the caterer has not arrived. The band is set up in an otherwise empty reception hall, and the only thing we have is champagne on ice and cupcakes. I knew the couple had stretched their resources for this reception. She was a paralegal, he was a produce manager. They were stalwarts in the choir. They were in all of the volunteer amateur musicals and choruses in the community. And so we had lots of actors and musicians, and they were ready to have this great party. But there was no food. Now, fortunately, the couple was blissfully unaware of the predicament. We had a great wedding ceremony. The groom actually played the violin and people sang, and it was just lovely. And of course, I'm holding all this tension about the reception. And we get through the I do's and the rings and the final blessing, the big kiss, and they've processed out, and everybody's going through the receiving line. I'm running back to the church hall. No food. No caterer. So the bride's grandmother says to me, look, if you can find food, I'll pay for it. So I'm going through the end of the receiving line. I'm going to have to drop this bomb, right? And so I get there and I go from congratulations to, oh, and you know what? Your caterer didn't show up. And I'm watching the bride's face and her jaw just drops. And there's a little tear starting to form just right in the corner of her eye. And then her mouth turns up into a big smile and she looks at her new husband. She throws her arms around him and says, I don't care because I'm with Stephen. And you know, it really touched my heart, and I relaxed a little. But you know what? This had to be made right. They deserved a celebration. So with their permission, I ran out. I went to my favorite little deli, State Street Fruit, there in Northampton. And what I did is I told the DJ, now, what I need you to do is, you know, you have all those dances. There's like the mother-daughter, or father-daughter, mother-son, first cousin dances with the grandmother. I said, just make them up. Just make sure everybody has some kind of special dance, and I'll eventually show up with the food. Don't give them the champagne yet. So I go to the deli, I explain the situation, and like, could you do some sandwich platters? And you know, you got that macaroni salad with the artichoke hearts and your Polish potato salad. I need that for 60, like ASAP. And something about, they were kind of horrified that this had happened. Almost like as caterers, this was an insult to the entire catering tribe. And so they were grabbing the stock clerks and people off the cash register and the guy sweeping the floors, and everybody's back there making sandwiches in this flurry of activity. And in 20 minutes, I had food for 60, and we're going to the checkout line, and they take me by the 10 people that are waiting in line and explain the situation about this wedding, and everybody's like, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, get him to the first of the line. And several people got out of line and helped me carry everything and load it into my car. So Jean and I are carrying these big plastic platters of you know, turkey and ham and tuna fish and potato salad. And we come in just as, I think it was the second cousin, grandfather, stepmother dance. And we came in and everybody applauded. And at that point, it didn't matter that there was no prime rib. A pastrami on rye was a miracle. It always is. But the point is, a community came together. People that didn't even know the bride and groom hustled to make that happen because this was a love that deserved to be celebrated fully. So that story is where my mind goes every time I think about the wedding feast in Cana and the wine runs out. Everyone wants their wedding to be remembered as a time of joy and abundance, not the family that didn't plan or that they were cheap or something, right? Good food and drink are essential. And wine also it has a deep symbolic meaning throughout scriptures. When Amos speaks of hope for restoration in hard times, he said, the mountains will drip with sweet wine, and all the hills will flow with it. Jesus compares his own message to wine, to new wine. It goes in new skins. If you put new wine in old skins, they'll burst. So this is a new message that needs its new wineskins. And of course, we celebrate communion, the cup of blessing, as a symbol central to our faith. So John is telling us something important here. This is Jesus' first act of ministry. A wedding where there is not enough wine. He's foreshadowing who Jesus is. He is the abundant giver of grace, the one who will provide for everyone. And this is the first of 7 signs in John's gospel to give us very vivid symbols of who Jesus is. He's the bread of life. He's the living water. He's the light of the world, the true vine. But first we have this conversation with Jesus' mother, Mary. We've got to get through that. She comes to Jesus and she says, they have no wine. Now, grammatically, these words are just a simple statement of fact. Oh, look, they have no wine. There's no command here. However, you probably know from experience in parent-child communications that indirect statements are often laden with responsibility, right? Look at the dirty dishes in the sink. If you answer, well, look at that, you're right. That would be the wrong answer. You know that you're supposed to get to work and help out and do something about the dishes in the sink. And Jesus, being a very intuitive person, of course, immediately understands that nudge of obligation. Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? The Message translation says, is this any of our business, Mother? Yours or mine? So what's at stake in that conversation? It sounds like it's about what is a social obligation. So imagine, you're at Cana. It's this little village. It's maybe a 2 to 3 hour walk to get from Nazareth over to Cana. Maybe they had some distant cousins or friends in that town. And a wedding in a small village like that might be the big event of the year. Weddings didn't just go long into the night. Weddings went for several days. I mean, if everybody's got to walk to get there, you might as well really have a party and feed and do everything for folks until they can go home. And imagine running out of wine day 1. I mean, everybody would remember that for generations, right? We don't know whose wedding it was, but it must not be like immediate, like brother, sister, family. And Jesus is responding to Mary and he says, why us? Like, is this really our obligation to take care of this? Doesn't the father of the bride usually handle this? Don't they have closer kin than us that should step in and fill the gap? We barely know these people. Jesus doesn't think that this is their obligation. Now notice, Mary doesn't bother to argue. She just goes to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you to do. This is no longer the Mary who ponders things quietly in her heart. She has now raised 5 teenagers to adulthood, and they should know the right thing to do without her even having to say it. So she just tells the servants, yeah, he's going to take care of this, go. So remember when Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the scribe says to him, who is my neighbor? Who am I really obligated to? Just my kin? Or is it bigger than that? And remember, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Somebody of a different ethnicity who comes and he helps the man who is beaten beside the road to illustrate, hey, if a person's in need, guess what? They're your neighbor. Treat them as you would kin. So maybe Jesus learned that lesson from his mom in Cana. And at the heart of the gospel, there is continually this stretching of kinship ties to go wider, to open to more people, a broader community, to strangers, even love of enemies, that those ties encompass ever wider circles. We're all kin in the human family. We all have the same species DNA. We're in this together. That message is what allowed Christianity to transcend one culture and one nation and become something much more universal in bringing people together. Now that word kin, you may have noticed it. We're using it in our liturgy. You may have heard it in our song that we sang, Abundance, that the lyrics use the phrase kingdom. Not kingdom, kingdom. You drop the G, you put in a dash, and you get a new word. And one of the early advocates of using this word was Ruth Duck, the prolific United Church of Christ hymn writer, whose life we celebrated last week with some extra music. And you've probably sung and prayed things like, "Thy kingdom come," for years. It sounds natural, doesn't it? If you've used it your whole life, it's a phrase that has resonance. But let me ask you this. Would you be comfortable bowing before a king? Would you like that style of government? We celebrate every 4th of July that this is the nation that overthrew a king. That we are one nation under God, liberty and justice for all, created equal. So isn't it odd that we keep using this word king in worship, which is something we really don't believe in, but we've kind of grown used to it. And I wonder if it sends an unintended message that we affirm an old hierarchical order of how things should be, rather than, well, being Congregationalists and seeing ourselves as equal before God. What shifts in your heart and mind when you hear that word kingdom instead of kingdom? What I notice is there's this movement away from a focus on kind of a political structure of hierarchy and power towards relationship, equality, community. In a kingdom, I feel responsible for something. I feel responsible to all of you. In a kingdom, the responsibility feels like it's somewhere else. Somebody else is going to be in charge, but kingdom, that's ours. So I'm going to urge you to test that word when kingdom shows up. And one nice thing about it is nobody's going to know what you're saying anyway, right? But it's good to try something new. You know, I was at the bell choir party last night and I was talking to Jamie. And Jamie was saying how she makes people switch bells sometimes. It helps the bell choir have more flexibility. It's good for your brain. And the bell choir, well, you don't always like that, right? You like your own bells. But you know what? You're a great bell choir. Because Jamie pushes you. She gets you out of your comfort zone to play and have more range. And working with our language can do the same thing. It can be good for our mind and our soul. All right, so let's get to the end of the story. Jesus tells the servants, fill those 6 stone jars with water. They become wine. And the master of the banquet tastes it and he says, oh, complex and full-bodied, with maybe a little hint of black currant and a finish that goes on like a good conversation. You've given us the best wine for last. Now, what if everybody knew that the wine had come from the ritual jars for purification? Would some of them been deeply offended that it had been used for such purposes? My 7th grade teacher once said, I told her, didn't Jesus turn water to wine? And she said, yeah, that's the one thing I didn't like about him. But this first miracle says there's something more important than ritual and trying to do it perfectly. It's announcing the great wedding feast has begun. And just as deli workers and the band and the guests and Jean and I worked hard to transform a moment of scarcity into a moment of joy, Jesus invites us into a kingdom where we can share in an abundance of grace and love. There's enough for all. The miracle isn't just about what happens with the wine. It's about abundance and joy and the ever-expanding circle of God's love where no one is left out. And today we're called to do the same, to stretch our sense of kinship, to see neighbors not as strangers, even enemies, as still a part of us, to bring joy and grace to a world that is so often focused on scarcity. Amen.